Bill, and I am back with my monthly recap. And the month of May was a pretty good one for me. Most importantly, before I get to the books, I want to talk about my book that I released, Deathstroke Colossus. I won't say too much about it because I talk about it enough online and stuff. But I did release this last month, and I am super excited about it. I'm glad people can read it now and it can get out there. But enough about me. So let's talk about what I actually did read. And I will say, up front, I read couple of different genres that I normally don't read very often. And it was good for me because I needed to branch out. I needed to do something different than my normal, sci-fi fantasy. And while some of these do have sci-fi or fantasy elements to them, they're more of a different genre. And the first one I read last month is in the horror genre. And I don't read a lot of horror. I watch horror movies. I'm more of like a zombie or that type of thing. I'm not a jump scare type of person. Not into like torture porn or any of that stuff. But the book I read fits in some of those genres. It's pretty interesting. It's called Mass Hysteria by Michael Patrick Hicks. This book was a fun one. It was relentless, let's say. It was bloody. There was a lot of body horror. It had some interesting concepts that are like zombie-esque. Really, this book felt like the movie Slither, if you've ever seen that, with the James Gunn movie back in the early 2000s with Nathan Fillion. This book, Mass Hysteria, was just a lot of fun. It starts off balls to the wall, like this bad thing happens and then takes over some animals, some bloodlust takes over animals, which was really kind of interesting to start with. And then it turned to people. And it just got crazy. Zombie stuff is in there, but then it's just like the Crazies, like the movie The Crazies. If you've ever seen the 70s or the remake of The Crazies, it had that feel to it. It was just a lot of fun, this book. And the way it ended, Michael definitely did not hold back. He went there over the course of the book. He goes there. He doesn't shy away from taboo topics like necrophilia or bestiality. There's a scene with that, but then there's just a lot like the trope, like those trigger warnings. If you want a trigger warning, he does them all. But it works. It worked in the book, and the character growth, and like there is a little bit of character growth. It's basically surviving this horrible situation. And it worked. It was really good, really fast paced, really quick, only about 300 some pages or so. And I read it really quick. It was a lot of fun, this book. So check out Mass Hysteria by Michael Patrick Hicks. And then I kind of went back into the fantasy field with a little bit of one that was also dark. It's called Path of Darkness. It's in the title, by C.M. Lackner. This book was interesting because it takes the chosen one trope-ish, and flips it on its head by making like the chosen one a bad guy almost. So like in this world, magic is outlawed. They get thrown up, basically burned at the stake, like, the witches and stuff in Salem and all that good stuff. Similar to that, if you use magic, you're a bad person. And, but there is a bunch of magic users, and they are doing quote unquote bad things, but in their mind, they're good things. So it's kind of cool because like there's a huge religious theme in this one. And then this main character, she goes to the dark side almost, if you will, and she gets trained in magic. And then she goes on to this, like, she joins this like rebel-esque type group, and the plot just goes from there. It's like almost two levels of plots. It was like her training, her turning to the dark side, learning about that, and then like coming to terms with that with herself. And then she goes into this murder spree, for lack of better words to say. Like it's just an interesting concept. It was really good, and I thought it was a good book. I will say the character growth was exceptional. It was cool to see this. It's a single POV. It's cool to see this POV, like, question her, place in the world of, trying to be good. And then she learns she has magic, which she didn't know she had. And then she has to deal with it. So the character growth was great. The pace was pretty quick. The world is very dark, surprisingly very dark. But then on the other side of things, there was like a very lighthearted feel to the way that the story is told. There's a lot of talk about sex and, being happy with sex and stuff like that. So it was just like a very interesting, like all these different things came together really nicely. So check out Path of Darkness by C.M. Lackner. So next up, I finished a book I started in April. This was my big chonky boy of the month, and I had a couple chonky boys. This was the biggest one. It is We Break Immortals by Thomas Howard Riley. Now, this book was, like I said, chonky. On my Kindle, it was over 1,100 pages. It was a beast. And the thing about this book is I've read 3 other of Thomas's books, and this was the last one that he has published. And all of them are awesome. They all take place in the same world, and it's pretty interesting concept where, magic users leave their own trace. So like there's consequences of using magic. So if you use magic, you leave this, what's called trace or render in the world. You leave it and it has colors. And there are people called render tracers that can chase you down and hunt down magic users. Again, similar to the Path of Darkness book, magic users are bad for the most part. So in this book, there's 3 main points of view characters, but there's like a dozen other ones that show up at some point. But the 3 main characters, you have your render tracer, which is basically a Blade Runner, for lack of better comparison. And then you have a magic user, and then you have this lush swordsman that, is just cocky and thinks he's the best in the world. And they are on a mission, not together at the start. They're on a mission to hunt down this rebel or this rogue magic user that is basically almost immortal. He's really hard to kill and hard to find. This book, like I said, is chonky, so there is so much that goes on. There is so much intrigue, so much action, so much magic user action, a lot of chase scenes, a lot of plans that go balls to the wall fail. It's just awesome. And then there is, on the other side of things, there is some great character deaths in here that hit really hard. The character growth is phenomenal because all 3 of these characters they're not broken, but they're not, in the best states of mind. They've gone through some shit throughout their lives. The main character, Aaron, which is the render tracer, aka Blade Runner, he's a drug addict. Then you have the magic user who is a rogue. She's a thief, but she's in one of the most stable marriages I've read in a very long time in a fantasy book. But yeah, it's just such a great story. And then towards the end, there's like 100-page battle. It reminded me of, the last book of Wheel of Time with the last battle. Points of view, going through all these different scenes, all this stuff. And it was just so much fun. And the ending, really top-notch, sets up for a sequel, but this book also really works as a standalone. And, it took me a couple weeks to finish this book, but I enjoyed every minute of it. And that is We Break Immortals by Thomas Howard Riley. Let's just say that We Break Immortals practically broke me too. I love the book, don't get me wrong, but it did put me in a little bit of a slump. Following up on that was hard. I went through a number of books and had to just put a number of them aside, even ones that are, well known, by people that are just well regarded in the indie community. And, I'll get back to them eventually, but I just couldn't find anything. I think I went through maybe half a dozen to 10 books that just weren't hitting. So I took a couple days off. And then the next 2 books I got to surprisingly have a similar theme, but completely different genres. Both are about bounty hunters. Surprisingly enough, that's what got me out of my mini slump. So the first one I want to talk about is The Silver Crystal by Ryan Lanz. This one was interesting. Normally the fantasy that I read or typically read has, a sprawling epic cast with, big series that, have things to go on and, there's plots to unlock and all that stuff. But this one it fits that, but it also is more self-contained. Whereas this first book, The Silver Crystal was just very much a more inward style book. And I loved it. I think that's what really helped get me out of it. The slump was because this is more of a self-contained, smaller, if you will, story, even though I know there's multiple books in this series and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But this one, it's about a bounty hunter, again, following the theme, magic is bad. And in this world, which is kind of interesting, is that these magic users who are called corrupted by the good people, they get this giant crystal slammed in the middle of their hand, and that magic crystal stops them from being able to use magic. And it's stuck in there, so they have to lose their dominant hand, really, because they can't wrap it around the crystal. It's an interesting concept. And the main character is the bounty hunter that puts that in. And then bad things, TM, happen. Things that you can kind of glean what I'm trying to say without spoiling it. Turns out he's... All right, I'll stop there. But anyway, it's his journey. Again, it's mostly his POV. There are other POVs in it, but it's mostly him coming to terms with how his life just got upended. And it was a really good character story. And I think that really helped me get out of my slump, is because I'm used to reading I typically read more, plot-based. And this was more character-based. And this was a very good character arc. And then there's some good characters that he meets along the way. And one of them is basically an amalgamation of Pippin Took and Tasselhoff Burfoot. And, just it's like a halfling character who is just really funny, but a traveling merchant, but doesn't really have much to sell. And that's where a lot of the source of humor came from, was this character Gobo. And their characters just kind of bickered with each other as characters, which worked out really well for the book itself. And then the arc itself at the end, him, the main character, coming to terms with where he's at with his new existence, meets his old existence, and that was a good ending point. And I thought that was really great. So The Silver Crystal was expertly written, very well paced. It was about 400 pages, 350, 400 some odd pages maybe. And I read it pretty quickly. It's a quick read, and it's very well done. The prose is excellent. The plotting is excellent. Character worth is definitely top notch. So check out The Silver Crystal by Ryan Lanz. Now, the next one I read in conjunction with that. So I read both of those bounty hunter stories at the same time. But this one took me a little bit longer because it was another chunky boy, 650 pages. And I've already talked about this one, is Bounty Inc. by Adam Holcombe. Now, this book is hilarious. It's basically like a Deadpool movie without the fourth wall breaks, but it has that type of tone where it's a dark story, but there is humor laced in it. And it's about a Nepo baby who wants to become a bounty hunter. And he sets up this business, using his daddy's money, because his daddy passed away in the prologue. So he sets up a bounty hunter group, and you just get to meet all these cool bounty hunters. And the story is, it's linear, but there's also a lot of interludes where it's from the point of view of the bounty hunters going on a bounty hunt. And then it all adds up to this big overarching arc of their bounty gone wrong, basically, if you will. But there's some found family tropes in here. There's a good romance angle in here. This is an LGBTQ plus norm world with characters in it, which was great. Alien species are just phenomenal with cool, abilities and powers and other stuff. The humor is just spot on. Like it's humorous in the way it's written, but it's also humorous in the way that the character situations happen. There is this cannon called the slag cannon that these characters just talk about using and want to use the whole time. And then there's like a numpty assistant that actually gets to use it, which was really funny. But there's also awesome action. There is great action in this. And Adam, if you've read his Gam Gam the Necromancer story, or, that story is not so much action. But this, I was surprised by how much action was in this book. Again, chunky boy. And it's just a great book. And there's a scene. It's a 44-minute chapter, which when you look on the Kindle, it's just like, holy crap, 44 minutes. But it's basically an interview of all the bounty hunters. And it reminds me, and Adam said it was from the Deadpool 2 scene that inspired him. But it's like that. And then you have all these characters that just come in that are just ridiculous. And there's the good bounty hunters, and then there's the ones that just want to be bounty hunters but have no business being bounty hunters. So the scene is hilarious. Check out Bounty Inc. by Adam Holcombe. You won't be disappointed. So up next, I read The Black Bane by Lucy Lyons, or L. Lyons on the cover. Now, this one was interesting, had a great concept, and this one kind of brought it back to what I normally read, which is plot-based versus character-based. And I say that because while there are some great characters in it, it's all about pushing this plot forward. I will say the main character, it's a one POV character. 95% of the book is one POV. She doesn't have a lot of agency in the beginning. She just has to go with the flow of where the plot's going to take her. But the plot itself, and let me talk about the plot. It's phenomenal. It is, so this cult thousands of years ago are trying to bring a god back. They fail. That happens in the prologue. And what comes out of it is the Black Bane, which is like this misted forest that's like deadly. There's a plague kind of aspect to it, and it makes these cultists just like look like dead, desiccated bodies with like black overtaking everything in their veins and stuff like that. So the main character, her magic power is that she nullifies other magic. So these cult people, 800 some odd years later, are trying to redo this cult ritual because it happens on a blood moon or blood eclipse, and they're trying to get back into this forest to get this item, this relic that the last guy failed with, and they come to her because she can nullify the effects of the Black Bane with her magic. Now stuff happens, she goes on this journey, she runs away basically, she meets all these different types of characters with different cool powers. They join up as a group, kind of like you have your mage, you have your warrior, you have a rogue warrior from the cult group, you have this shapeshifter kind of god almost, but I'm not going to spoil anything. He's a mysterious guy that could be a god, but he's not a god. I don't know. I really don't want to say much about that without you reading it. But it's interesting because then she does get into the forest where the area is, and she deals with the relic, and then some more stuff happens. So it's kind of like there's an interesting plot to it, and the plot just dragged me in. And this book is not long. Again, it's under 400 pages. The pace is so well done. Like I read this in 2 days, basically. It's quick. The prose is great. It's simple, but it's not basic, and it just draws you in. And like I said, I wish there was a little bit more character agency for the main character at the beginning, but towards the end she gets more and does things for herself once she gets to the forest and stuff like that. So the Black Bane by Lucy Lyons, great book. So I ended this month with a book I've seen a lot over the last couple of years in this indie community, and I've wanted to read it. I've just put it off for whatever reason, and this is a book that it fits exactly what it's trying to go for, and that book is Sledge versus the Labyrinth by Nick Horvath. This book is it's insane. It's got a Squid Game feel to it, but with this dude who is 6'10", former basketball player, pit fighter in prison for many years in Russia. He carries a sledgehammer. It's hard to explain this book without spoiling anything, but he gets drawn into this deadly dark web game show type thing called the Labyrinth, where bad things are going to happen to them and they have to survive. That's basically all it is. And Sledge, that's his nickname. He carries a sledge, obviously, sledgehammer. He just destroys dudes left and right. Like he goes into, like, every other chapter is basically him going into a fight and destroying guys. And there is some Deus Machina in there. He survives things when he probably shouldn't, but it's explained in how his history and his body has adapted over years of training and stuff like that, which, okay, some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This book is like pure 80s action fun where it would fit comfortably next to Commando and Cobra or Red Heat or something of that ilk. And it's a hard-boiled book with a little bit of noir in there. And it's just a dude beating the crap out of people. It's fun. And what's great about Nick's writing is that the chapters are short. They're like 3-4 pages at most, some of them. And it's just punchy. It's first-person point of view, so you're in Sledge's point of view. And he is quippy. He's funny. He talks a big game, and he backs up the big game with his muscles and his sledgehammer. But he also gets his ass handed to him quite often. But he's smart, too, because like the author, Nick Horvath, Sledge has a degree in physics. So he understands science. And that was really interesting because he's not just a big, dumb brute. Sledge is a smart man, even though he is a big brute. So you see the way that Nick writes in these chapters is you actually see some of this stuff used and make sense from a scientific standpoint. While some of it might be a little bit outlandish, okay, that's fine. But it makes sense in the scheme of things in this book because it sounds plausible. And that is what really surprised me is, when you see this book and people talk about this book, it's just like, oh, this guy beats the crap out of people in this deadly game show-esque type plot. Yes, but there is more to Sledge, and Sledge is an interesting character. And yeah, he's kind of a masculine bro dude that just kind of like ogles this one female character that he's kind of digging. And yeah, some of the language is a little bit crass. So what? It fits the tone of the book. And when books do exactly what the author sets out to do, I will have a blast with it all day long. And Nick Horvath set out to make this book like this specific type, and he nails it. And it was just a fun read. I read this book in 2 sittings, and I just had a blast with it. So if you're looking for just a dumb, fun book, like a ridiculously fun book of just needing some action, check out Sledge versus the Labyrinth. And I know there's a sequel coming up, and it sets up the sequel a little bit towards the end. And I'm excited to see where that goes because there is some cool backstory that is linked with where that sequel title is and in this story. So I'm interested. And I just don't know how Nick is going to keep this world going, but I am intrigued. I will definitely be reading book 2 whenever that comes out. So check out Sledge vs. the Labyrinth by Nick Horvath. And I will be back next month with my reading recap. So see you then. Bye.